be starting now. إن الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah today we'll be continuing the discussion on the topic of innovation, al-bid'ah, which I think, went into quite a lot of depth in the last week's episode. So today we'll be covering this subject from a slightly different angle, although the themes are going to be kind of the same, but inshallah we're going to be presenting a new angle today. So one of the most famous books on the subject of innovation and the subject of bid'ah has been written by Imam al-Shatibi, which is called Al-Ihtisam bi Shatibi. He goes into a lot of details: what constitutes innovation, what are the different views of the scholars, what are the reasons of ikhtilaf, and again he goes on into and defines in a lot of detail, you can say, what comprises the various types, which as we discussed last week, which Imam Shafi'i mentioned, as well as what Imam Ibn al-Biz mentioned. All that we kind of discussed in the last week is Abdus Salam, which he mentioned. Now, basically, as we've understood that the definition of bid'ah, it means something which is new, something which is unprecedented, something which has not been known before. And it has a linguistic definition, which means something new. Then it has kind of a Shari definition. From an Islamic perspective, what exactly does this mean? From Islamic perspective, obviously it means something which is a new routine, which is a new methodology which has been brought into the religion. And also, we can say that from this understanding, that is something that innovation is something which differentiates it from Sunnah. So on one side you have Sunnah, and on other hand you have something which is innovation, which is called bid'ah. And then we also mentioned, the different kind of ahadith. We mentioned man ahdasa fi amrina hadha ma laysa fihi huwa rad. The hadith in Bukhari, which Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that whosoever innovates in this matter of ours, then that which is not from it, from that something which does not belong to it, then it will be rejected. And then also we did mention the khutbat al-haja of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa sharrul umuri muhdathatuha wa kullu muhdathatin bid'ah wa kullu bid'atin dalalah wa kullu dalalatin fin nar, which normally Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned. Now, the point of contention between the various scholars is this word. Which word? That وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ دَلَالَةٍ, that every innovation takes us astray. This is a point of contention. Now, as we mentioned also last week, that do we actually, when we understand from the Sharan perspective, did Prophet ﷺ actually mean that even the smallest of the affairs are going to be in the hellfire? And we did give some examples, like for example, if you are using tasbih in order to do zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are some of the examples we gave. If you are, for example, sometimes you are wearing a kufi, sometimes you are not wearing a kufi. Because all these are again from the sunnah. So we shouldn't be going into extremes in either, that we all the time we are not wearing, or we are wearing or we are not wearing. That is something which we brought as another example. Now, what is important for us to understand? The most important thing is that Islam is now complete. There is no tempering which is allowed in terms of worship. In terms of ibadat, this is something which is absolutely clear for all of us, inshallah. Now, do we also say that Islam is something which actually requires updates? Like, for example, you have different versions of a software, is that something which is actually required? And the answer is obviously no. Islam is not a Microsoft or a Windows version which requires update all the time. And this is where we actually differentiate the Ahlul Sunnah. They differentiate this particular philosophy from the progressives. Now, what do the progressives do? These new movements, these new age movements of progressives, what do they say? They say that we are going to be changing a lot of what has been there. Yeah, and obviously from the Ahlul Sunnah perspective, that is something which we cannot ascribe ourselves to those particular progressive themes. Yeah, so for example, women leading, yeah, the salah, for example, in a lot of cases, this example has been brought in. There has been, yes, one textual evidence. Yeah, there is one dalil, one particular dalil, in which is an isolated dalil. Yeah, which actually this has happened. Yeah, if we look into the history in the seerah, this has happened only once in a very isolated situation in a particular house. But can we do the chaos on this example and say, khalas, women can now lead the prayers in the masajid? And obviously the answer is, we are not going to be going into those progressive routines, as now the progressives say. Similarly, we have a new situation now where we have, for example, the LGBT community of Muslims, which are opening up their own masajid and they're leading the salah there. So what do we do? How do we deal with those situations? Again, it's very clear, that is something which is not from the sunnah, that is not from the deen again, and we need to be staying away from all those progressive strands of Islam. Now, on the other hand, we have certain statements from the likes of Imam Malik, for example, where he has said, and we did mention it, I think, a couple of episodes back, that if someone thinks that if he's bringing something new in the religion, and if he thinks that is something which is good, and if he thinks that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes that, then in other words, we are saying that na'uzubillah, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has not done his job. Yeah, this is how Imam Malik has stated. Now, from a mainstream perspective, obviously Islam is complete. We don't need to have pick and choose. It's something which is absolutely complete. We don't have to carve another kind of situation within it. On top of it, we also realize that bid'ah cannot be in in worldly matters. So bid'ah cannot be in dunyavi matters, in worldly matters. That is something which is in the religious matters. There is a gray area in between where there is something worldly and people make it religious. Yeah, and then there is a lot of discussion and debate, which again has to be looked at by the scholars from time to time. And we go back and return to the scholars to discuss those particular issues. And again, if there is something which you have at the back of your mind, so please, in your comment section, please do mention those. Whether you think those particular acts, amal, can be termed as bid'ah or not, please mention those in the comment section, and inshallah in the next episodes we'll deal with them. Now, also do remember that not every haram is a bid'ah. Not every haram. So we have to differentiate between a sin and a bid'ah. So not every haram is bid'ah, but every bid'ah in most cases, you can say, is more closest to haram than something which is mubah. Okay, and we'll again, we'll describe that. So what are the categories of normally acts? What are the normal category of acts? So you have halal, haram, mubah, mustahab. Okay. Also remember that there are two different philosophies which we mentioned the last time, the two different stands. Yeah, one stand of Imam Shatibi. Although I would say that Ibn Taymiyyah differed from that stand to some extent. Yeah, so Ibn Taymiyyah had he was more closely attached to the strand of Imam Shatibi, but he had, you can say, a differentiation, and we'll speak about those differentiations inshallah in the coming episodes. That how does he differentiate how Imam Shatibi, for example, understood, yeah, or the school which is following those particular principles of Imam Shatibi. And then there is the other stand, which is, we know, which people normally, for example, people who are doing Maulid, the Eid Milad al-Nabi, which people celebrate, etc., etc. Now, Again, this is something which let's take it very slowly, because we really need to understand this topic very well. So the first school allows for changes and fine tunings that has evidence from other areas of Islam. Yeah. So as Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, that it will be rejected which is not from it in the hadith of Bukhari. So they say no, there is certain pieces of evidence which are from Islam which we will be bringing, and then we will be doing certain acts which are allowed in other aspects of Islam. And also they claim that those particular acts are perhaps in the spirit of Islam. Yeah, and a typical example which is normally given is Eid Miladun Nabi, that it is in the spirit of Islam that you do it, and we'll inshallah be discussing these topics. Imam Shafi also says, and the other camp, they say that Imam Shafi only means the linguistic meaning of bid'ah here. He doesn't mean the shari meaning, which again you can debate. But obviously Imam Shafi, when he's writing upon on the topic of bid'ah, then he is not talking about the linguistic definitions. He's talking about the shari definitions. So Imam Shafi then says that bid'ah is something which is new. It can be sometimes be sinful, and sometimes he says it can be encouraged. So what is going to be sinful is what is contrary to the Quran and Sunnah. All the other aspects are going to be discouraged. Okay. Then, as we said, Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam, he actually mentioned the 5 categories of bid'ah. He says that they are, they can go all the way from something which is wajib to mustahab to makruh to mubha and to haram. Now, an example which can be understood is, can we say that listening to music and murdering someone is the same category? But how do we normally understand? So, for example, if you speak to someone, how would he tell you? He would say, yes, murder is obviously haram. Then if you ask him, what about music? Yeah, there is difference of opinion amongst the scholars. But let's say you go to the other strand which believes that music is haram. So is it the same kind of haram as murder? And the answer is, of course not. It's not the same category of haram. So what we have is that we have major and the minor sins. Correct? So similarly, we have categories of innovation within it, just like what we have as something which is a major bid'ah and something which you can say are from the furu of bid'ah. Yeah, not from the etiqadiyah, not from the fundamentals, but from the furu. Now, also, we have to understand that why have these differences come? So, what we have is that there are smaller differences which actually have been found in other texts. And I'll give you some examples. So one of the major example is the gathering of the Quran. So when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he mentioned, when Umar radiallahu anhu mentioned to him that we have to ensure that the Quran is gathered. What happened? He refused initially, right? He refused once, twice, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened the chest of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and the Quran was collected. Now, what did Abu Bakr say then? The Prophet ﷺ didn't do that. Correct? This is what Abu Bakr said. The Prophet ﷺ didn't do that. Yeah? So that means he wanted to follow the Prophet ﷺ. But again, due to the very fact that overall, as Muslims, what is mustahab, what is recommended, what is something which is from the from the understanding of the deen is that we have to preserve Islam. So in order to preserve Islam, Quran needed to be collected, because as we know the story, that the Huffaz were getting killed, because initially obviously most of the Quran was in the hearts and minds of the Huffaz, although there were some parchments. Again, we are not going to be going into that discussion, but obviously we understand this very well. Another example which is given is again the Taraweeh example, and again both schools, the school which says The Taraweeh was a sunnah because Prophet ﷺ prayed, and Umar radiallahu anhu, when he said that let's introduce a bid'ah hasana, yeah, the bid'ah hasana which Umar radiallahu anhu mentioned with regards to Taraweeh, then one camp says that he did not introduce anything new because 3 days Prophet ﷺ prayed. But the other camp says that Prophet ﷺ did not pray after that. Yeah. But what we understand from this is that Umar anhu, obviously, he was mentioning this term of bid'ah hasana from an angle of the linguistic meaning as something, which we have to do something which is good. Yeah, he was discussing from this particular angle. He was not discussing it from a Shari angle, of course, by this example. As Umar anhu, what he did, he gathered everyone under one particular imam. Yeah, and this is again a story which we understand. But again, we do understand that every change in the religion is not evil of the same extent. Yeah. The whole point, guys, I'm going into a lot of discussion and debate in this is because there is one strand which goes to extremes in calling everyone mubtadi, innovators, bid'ati, and they go to extremes. Then there is the other camp who wants to do everything. These, for example, these extreme Sufis who want to do everything in religion and they want to innovate everything in religion. And they say, because Umar did this, because Imam Shafi has said this, so we'll continue to do whatever we want to do. So what is the correct, inshallah, opinion from amongst the scholars is that we take the view of Ibn Taymiyyah and a lot of these examples and other scholars who try to reconcile these differences. We do not go to extremes on the either side, inshallah. Yeah. So what is Ibn Taymiyyah's definition? So Ibn Taymiyyah says that every matter by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worshipped and reward is expected, but the Sharia did not come with, kept silent, or did not sanction it, then that would be a bid'ah. Yeah. So now, we don't want to open the door of bid'ah. That is very clear. And if no one wants to open the door for bid'ah, the problem actually becomes, as we discussed in last week, that when we try to understand this particular concept of bid'ah al-haqiqiyya and bid'ah izafiyya, this is the bid'ah izafiyya area is the area where most of the problem actually comes. We discussed 3 categories of bid'ah last week, and we touched upon the kind of the 5th category. I did not mention the 4th category, which is the bid'ah basita and the bid'ah murakkaba. So bid'ah basita is something which is a major bid'ah, and bid'ah murakkaba is something which is a minor type of a bid'ah. As we have mentioned that all sins are not the same. So similarly, all bid'ahs are not the same. As haram has a huge spectrum, similarly bid'ah has a huge spectrum. So for example, denying qadar is major bid'ah, is a major innovation. Yeah, denying qadar. Denying that Sahaba are righteous, major bid'ah. Yeah, what the other category, not Ahlus Sunnah, but the other camp, what they say. How it is done. So, for example, from an failure perspective. So, for example, if someone is doing group zikr, yeah, and we did mention that hadith of that asar of Abdullah ibn Masud, if you remember, yeah, Abu Musa al-Ashari and Abdullah ibn Masud's asar, which we mentioned, I think, a couple last week or the week prior, can't remember exactly, but episode 1 or 2 or 3. So again, but can we say that if someone is sitting and he is doing zikr in a circle, is it the same type of bid'ah as if someone is denying qadar, which is from the fundamentals of religion? Can we say that? And the answer is, of course, not. It is not the same categories. Yes, it will still be bid'ah, but it will not be the same category of bid'ah. Now, where I am leading to with all this discussion, we are leading to something, correct? And inshallah, you'll see where I'm leading into, because again, we'll be discussing the hadith of the 73-6, the hadith of how the ummah actually, how do we understand this hadith of 73-6? That is something very major. And these initial episodes, inshallah, if we are correctly able to understand from Imam Ibn al-Jawzi's book. And again, as we do the sharah of this book from other examples like the book of Al-Farq Bain al-Firq and Al-Milal wa Nahal and again other books, which inshallah we will be mentioning, then we will see how the scholars have defined this categorization of the 73 sects. Now, Bida Haqiqiyya and Bida Idafiyya, I just touched upon, and I gave an example of Sheikh Sulaiman al-Ruhaili when he mentioned the sacrifice. This is where I ended last week. So just recall that discussion. If you haven't, then go back and listen to that episode towards the end. So Bida Idafiyya is something. So Haqiqiyya is something which is the true Bida, bringing something which is unprecedented. Yeah. So obviously that is something which is absolutely not to be done. Bida Idafiyya is something to add something to a particular action, which is there, which is something from the deen itself, but there is just a little bit of izafa within it. And again, I'm giving you an example, doing zikr. So for example, if it's not Eid Miladun Nabi, and if I do Darood 100 times on Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, would I call it a bidah? Would I call it an innovation? But if I do it on the day of Eid Miladun Nabi, then what will be the answer? Yeah, I'm used to doing it after Fajr. I do 100 times Darood. Yeah, but also I do it on the day of Eid Miladun Nabi. So would I consider it to be bidah? And the answer is of course not, because that is something which again from the zikr. But then if what I do is, if I gather a crowd and I start chanting, As-salatu was-salam ala Rasulullah, and everyone is chanting and everyone is going into ecstasy, then did the Sahaba did that? And the answer is of course. This is not what we see from the Sahaba or the Tabi'in. Yeah, but do we say that it's the same level? Do we know their intentions? Do we even know that these people understand what they're doing is incorrect? Yeah. So we don't go to extremes in calling them. Yes, what they're doing is something which can be termed and which is termed bidah, but we don't criticize them from that angle because we don't know their niyyah. As Ibn Taymiyyah himself mentions in Majmu' al-Fatawa, that even who are doing the milad, that is something which is from an innovation. But Allah subhanahu, Ibn Taymiyyah is mentioning, remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might reward them for that act based on that niyyah. Okay? So we need to be, again, very careful as to how we understand these things. An act which might be allowed in all circumstances, or in certain circumstances, can become a bidah if we add a particular time. So remember this clearly. If we add a particular time, a particular place, or a particular number to it, it can become a bidah. It can, yeah. It is not a must that it will. But again, if you look into the scholars which have come in after the Tabi'een, and if you look into the history of the Islamic scholarship, I'll give you another example. And I think I did give you this example of the shayateen, how to actually get rid of the shayateen. So there is so much you get from the Sunnah. So for example, Surah Fatiha and other things you get from the Sunnah. But then scholars, these people, the Raqi, they have their own experience that this is how you can actually get rid of the evils, the shayateen. There are certain things which can be done in order to get rid of these shayateen. You can say 95% or 90% of it is through experience. That is not something which is, again, coming directly from the seerah or from the sunnah. That is not something coming directly. So for example, some has the experience of actually reciting certain verses of Surah Safat. Someone has other experience of reciting, for example, certain verses of other surahs. Yeah, and reciting certain, for example, azkar in a specific manner in a number of times. Again, all of it is not from the Sunnah. But the scholars allow it because that is something which is through experience. Okay? We cannot call those things bid'ah. Yeah? But if you look purely towards the definition which Imam Shatibi takes, then even those things can be termed bid'ah. Yani, we are not saying that what they're saying is incorrect. I'm just trying to paint a picture for you that everything is not so black and white. Yeah, so we don't have to go into extremes on the either side. Again, if these different tariqas, yeah, so the Barelvis normally, the Sufis, they have these different tariqas and they assign to their murideen, they assign certain azkar. They say, it works for us. Yeah, they say, it works for us. Why do you reject us? La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, if I say, or I say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, or if I say, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin, a particular times during a particular day, after Fajr, it helps me. They say this, they argue this, and they assign these different azkar to these different tariqas. But is it from the Sunnah? Again, you understand where I'm leading on to this. If someone does the same thing on his own, without going to any sheikh of any tariqah, and he does it on his own, can you call it an innovation? Can you call it a bid'ah? Let's say even if someone makes it a habit, because that is helping him. Like what we have observed in our daily lives, that if someone does durood repeatedly, or if someone does istighfar, but again, if you look into the other camp says that there is some reference to it in the Sunnah. Yeah, and again, staying true to the other camp, to the more hardened stance which they take, we also say, fine, alhamdulillah, this stance which you're taking is fine. Yani, continue to take that stance, but do not call the other people into extremes form of bid'ah. This is what we just want to clarify. Okay, now can we again, through experience, as we have mentioned about the example of the azkar, the issue of the Taraweeh we have mentioned. Now, again, other issues like Usman radhiyallahu anhu, he introduced the second adhan, if you remember that particular episode. And the reason the Usman radhiyallahu anhu gave was that he wanted to do the first adhan prior to calling the second one, just which is said before the khutbah starts of the khatib when he enters the masjid, in order to ensure that the Jummah is about to begin and to allow people to close their shops and to close their businesses. That was not from the Sunnah. But the other argument is that there's a particular hadith where Prophet ﷺ has particularly mentioned. And what is that hadith? Prophet ﷺ mentioned is that whosoever lives long from amongst you, then he will see a lot of differing. So whosoever is living long would see a lot of differing. Then follow my sunnah, yani Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sunnah, and the sunnah of the rightly guided caliphs. Okay, so this is what Rasulullah is mentioning. So who are the four rightly guided caliphs now? The four rightly guided caliphs are obviously Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, and Ali radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, if they do something, can we call it bid'ah? These four? And the answer is, of course not. Because what they are doing is, again, Prophet ﷺ is clearly stating, if they are introducing something, if they are bringing something, then absolutely not that can be termed, because they are the rightly guided ones. This is very clear. So this is the answer to that camp which brings this example of introducing the second azan, because this is from the acts of ibadah, remember. Bid'ah can only be in acts of ibadah, worship, from the acts of religion, not from the worldly affairs. But the other camp still says, fine, we agree that Usman Zarana has done it, but he did it to attain, what was his logic? What was the reason he did it? Because he wanted the spirit of Islam, the spirit of the Sharia, the goal of the Sharia to be implemented, which was what? Which was that in order for people to reach Jummah on time, we introduced the second azan. This was his logic. Okay? But at the end of the day, this is something which you can say this is bid'ah izafiyah. You cannot say this is not bid'ah izafiyah from the first camp's perspective. So what is the conclusion, brothers and sisters? What is the conclusion? Remember that this is an issue of ikhtilaf. Sorry, I keep on touching my nose because I've got a kind of a sinus issue. So normally I have to, do this to my nose all the time. Apologies for that. So what is the safest opinion? The safest opinion in these circumstances is that we remain on the side of the Ibn Taymiyyah camp and Imam Shatibi's camp, because that is the safest side. Because, brothers and sisters, what will happen? And I will show you a couple of videos to show you that if we allow this door to open of bid'ah, then what is the level of extreme it can actually go to? Yeah. So let me show you now a particular example, inshallah. I'll put myself on mute and show you this example, inshallah, in 5 seconds, inshallah. Okay, subhanallah. So this is one example. Now let's look at another example. And what is that other example? I'll share my screen once again for that other example. This is from Egypt. So this particular example is from Egypt.
Mosques and streets in Cairo are bathed in light for the anniversary. Special tasty treats can be found, and to honor the Prophet, food is given to the poor. It's a time for coming together as a community. On this day, we communicate with friends and relatives. The whole family meet with each other in this atmosphere of joy on the occasion of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. We are very happy about the Prophet Muhammad's birth. In Egypt and in the world, we feel reborn as Muslims. One of the most important Islamic celebrations in Egypt. Many see this as an opportunity to proclaim and rejoice at the Prophet's teachings. For Sufi Muslims, a display of singing and dancing demonstrates their devotion. Our correspondent says the message of those celebrating here this year.
Okay, let me just okay. Now, I hope everyone can hear me back, inshallah. So I have actually shown you two particular examples. Now, what do we understand from these examples is what is the key. When we are saying let's not go into extremes, then it is very clear for us to understand that obviously these parties unfortunately are going into extremes. Yeah. But for example, if on the day of the Milad, what you do is that in order to remind the people, you have a Seerah conference, for example, and you speak about the different aspects of Seerah. For example, how Prophet ﷺ was a leader, how Prophet ﷺ was a father, how Prophet ﷺ was a husband. Yeah. If you're trying to educate the people how Prophet ﷺ implemented the Quran in his life, if you on that day, if you're doing certain seminars, you're doing certain stuff, then what happens? Obviously, you cannot call that all that bid'ah. It's not going to be the case. So, what we understand, brothers and sisters, from all of this discussion is that it is not so simple. Going to extremes either way is absolutely not something which is recommended. Let's look at some other examples now. What are the other examples? When Usman radiallahu anhu, he wanted to collect the Musaf, Abdullah ibn Masud did not agree with him. He said, no, that is something which I don't recommend. Abdullah ibn Masud did not agree with him because he had his own viewpoint. So there was difference of opinion. Imam Malik, he went on to say that you cannot even put dots on the Quran. Imam Malik, the jurist, the great jurist Imam Malik, he said you cannot even put dots on the Quran. Now, can we actually, us specifically non-Arabs, even the Arabs, can we read the Quran without the dots or the tashkil? And the answer is of course not. Even the people who are experts in ulum al-Quran, it will take them a lot of time to actually read through if the Quran is without dots and without tashkil. So Imam Malik said that is something which is not allowed because that is going to be bid'ah. Then how did, for example, the various khulafa, how were they elected? So how was Abu Bakr elected? Again, we know that Prophet ﷺ did do some isharat in different ahadith. Like, for example, Abu Bakr led the salah in the presence of Rasulullah ﷺ for a number of days. We know that from the hadith. So there were certain isharat, but nothing was clear. And by consensus, what happened? Abu Bakr was elected the Khalifa. In this book, Al-Farq Bain Al-Firq, Abu Mansur Abdul Qahir bin Tahir Muhammad al-Baghdadi, he actually mentions, and this is one of the greatest books if we really want to understand these different kind of sects. He mentions the first khilaf which came onto the Muslims. Which was the first one? Where to bury Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah. After the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, and he was elected by consensus, obviously. And how the Ansar, they wanted someone to be from amongst them. But then Abu Bakr brought this hadith of Rasulullah that the Khalifa is going to be from the Quraysh, and the ikhtilaf was finished. What was the second Khilaf? Where Prophet is going to be buried? And there were different opinions. And Abu Bakr again brought that hadith that Prophet has said that the prophets are buried where they pass away. And because he passed away in the house of Aisha radhiyallahu anha, he was buried exactly in that same spot. Yeah. How Umar was selected? Umar was nominated by Abu Bakr. So can we say it was bid'ah because Prophet did not nominate Abu Bakr, or Prophet did not clearly nominate someone? Can we say it was bid'ah? How Usman was elected? When Umar, Abu Majus al-Lolo, when he tried to martyr Umar anhu, and he was successful, and Umar anhu was on his deathbed, what did he do? He made a shura of 6 people, and Abdurrahman bin Auf was the head of that shura. This is how Usman was elected as Khalifa. So can we say that Usman did a bid'ah? And similarly, how obviously the Ummah, then again it turned from Khilafah to the Malukiyat, which as we know, again can we say that the Malukiyat is from the bid'ah? But again we have various other ahadith which mentions the Malukiyah, which mentions the kinship, which is going to be following the Ummah. So what we actually get is that there are certain other examples. So for example, do we teach in the madaris? How do we teach our children? Do we do the dua of Khatm al-Quran, which is only mentioned from one Turk of, I think, if I remember correctly, let me not say the name of the Sahabi because I might make a mistake. So, dua of Khatm al-Quran, what is the evidence for that? I think from Anas radhiyallahu anhu. I think that is an evidence from Anas that he just did it once. He only prayed once with his family, the dua of Khatm al-Quran. But can we say that is now a bid'ah? The other camp still says that is a bid'ah. Yeah, they are absolutely adamant that that is a bid'ah. But can we say that is a bid'ah? That kind of bid'ah. Can we say that these people are from the Mubtadi'un? Can we say that? And of course the answer is not. That is not the case. Now, Hafiz ibn Hajar, he mentions that technically it can be a bid'ah. Yani the Maulid, the Eid Milad al-Nabi, technically can be called a bid'ah. But then he mentions if it is done in a good manner, like what we've explained, for example, if you're doing a Seerah conference on that day. But how far does one go is what the counter question is. How far does one go? And the safest approach, the videos I've shown you, is let's keep it, let's remain at the side of exactly how Prophet ﷺ has explained this, how the Sahaba implemented it, how the Tabi'een followed it, and that is absolutely the safest of the approaches. Even there are examples of, for example, what should be the steps of the Khatib when he raises onto the member for Jummah. In the hadith, it is mentioned that Prophet ﷺ's member had 3 steps. So can we say that the member cannot have 5 steps, or the member cannot have 4 steps, or it cannot have 2 steps? If there is a member, if let's say there is a huge Jamia Masjid, millions of people pray in that masjid, like you, let's say you're talking about Al-Haram, yeah? Or let's say the big masajid, let's say the Regent's Park Mosque in London, or let's say the Faisal Masjid in Pakistan, yeah? Or let's say the Jamia Masjid of Delhi in India. Can we say that if the member has 15 steps because the Khatib has to go really high in order for him to be visible to the congregation, can we say that is a bid'ah? And again, the answer is, of course not. And that would be, but there is one camp, by the way, which says that will be a bid'ah. There is still one camp which says that. Yeah. So I think what has happened is, again, Imam Ibn Jawzi mentioned that the shaitan has deceived and he has camouflaged our senses. And what he has done through this, that shaitan, Tilbees Iblees, is what that he has, the ummah which was one, he divided that ummah into many different parts. And it was only possible because of certain particular reasons, that people wanted to either follow their imams, their leaders, or people wanted to stick to the guns, what they have understood, how they've understood. So author then brings that Huzaifa ibn al-Jaman used to ask the Prophet ﷺ about things which are going to harm. Yeah, this is a hadith which is reported by him. And Abdullah ibn Abbas mentions from that Turk, he mentions that, by Allah, I don't believe that the devil would like for anyone on earth to die more than me. He was asked why, and he replied, by Allah, he innovates something in the east or west, then a man carries him to me, yani that particular innovation, whatever the innovation is, the man carries him to Abdullah ibn Abbas, and then Abdullah ibn Abbas destroys that with the Sunnah. And the innovation then returns back to the shayateen. So here, inshallah, we'll end for today, because this is, I think, a very good place now for the next week, where we are going to be now starting chapter number 1. We've already started kind of chapter number 1, but now we have understood this concept of bid'ah very comprehensively, inshallah. And we'll start with the concept of jama'ah. That what is that concept of jama'ah? How Prophet ﷺ mentions, when he mentions the hadith of the 73 sects, what exactly does he mean by that? And we'll inshallah continue from there. So do not miss next week, because this guys, the hadith of 73 sects, if we are able to understand inshallah this hadith, I truly believe, and I think most of the scholars inshallah also have mentioned this, that if we truly understand this hadith, this division in the ummah, because nowadays, brothers and sisters, we have to unite the ummah upon haqq. We are not saying that we are going to be joining anyone's camps who are going to be doing innovation. No, we are not saying that. But we have to have certain criteria. We have to have certain mayas through which we can unite the ummah. So inshallah, we'll be discussing those, as how in al-Milal wal-Nahal, and also in al-Farq bain al-Farq, and how Imam Ibn Jawzi actually explains these things. So inshallah, let's speak about these issues next week. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.